Hello fellow Exiles, and welcome to my first video guide featuring the both Templar and Marauder. So, you might be wondering what has happened since the last patch, which was supposed to nerf elemental damage. Well, the differences aren't that big. I increased my damage on my elemental hit, but my overall damage dropped by about 10%, so the nerf it's not that significant. So, the difference between the bow Templar and bow Marauder isn't that big. It all comes down to the early game. You have the bow Marauder, which starts over here, and they have a bit, they have a tankier path per se. The Templar starts off with all the elemental damage and doesn't have as many health nodes. You have a lot more intellect, which means you can run auras earlier. While the Marauder will be more tanky, but has a harder time getting a bit of damage, which the Templar gets straight away. So for a softcore, going with the Templar is probably a better choice because you get the damage a lot quicker. While for a hardcore player, Marauder might be the better choice because you get all the health nodes quite easily. So, there are a couple of specific keystones you really need with this build. One of them is Iron Grip, which applies the physical damage increase you get from strength to ranged weapons. And the other one I've chosen is Resolute Technique, which is always hits, never crits. We're not really going for a crit build here. We're going more towards a fast attacking steady elemental damage build, which is why we don't need a crit. We can just ignore accuracy and just go full on elemental damage. And we don't have to care about it, which is why Resolute Technique is nice. The difference between the build now and before is that it's a bit harder getting all the things you need, which means that the early game to mid game will be a lot harder using this build because they're quite spread out by now. So it takes around 10 points just to get to Resolute Technique once you're in the middle, and it takes quite a while to get to Iron Grip now as well. So this means that everyone trying to run this build in early game will have a bit of a harder time than they had before. But I think it's still viable. It should be fine. It was quite OP before the patch. I was pretty much one-shotting minions from level 10 to level 60, so... Anyways. What we want to do here is we want to grab all this elemental damage that we can get in the Templar tree, which is here with Catalyze. We have Elementalist, and as a Templar I can take 1 point in this, which you would not do as a Marauder. As a Marauder, when you came up this Templar tree and you went for this dexterity and buff increase on yourself, you'd completely skip all these 6 points and just go up here instead. This also means that the Marauder will have 8% less elemental damage, but he's got 6 points freed up that the Templar does not have, which means he has an easier time getting to the other things just because of the start of the tree that the Marauder has. The Templar is forced to take 6 points, which he doesn't really need to take. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These could all be ignored. You could just go up here instead and take that. So otherwise it's a pretty standard build. We're picking up some elemental damage over here with the 30 strength node. Picking up the attack speed here. There's one agility node for 30 extra dex available if we need it. We don't need to get a lot of dex. We just need enough to equip the gear. And you need 179 for, I don't remember what the bow is called, but it's the best bow in the game, so you need 179. Oh, I have 198, so I'm a bit over the top. It's okay. You have another dex node here and another one here, and one up here. So you can play around with those if you want to. Depending on how much dex you have in your gear, I have a quite good neck, which gives a lot of dexterity, so I'm a bit ahead. The reason I don't take away a point is because if I find a new neck, I'll be actually under the dex cap, so keeping myself there. Okay, so I hope I've explained the tree. I'll give a link in the description as well of the entire one, so you can see. So let's go on to the character build. So what you want to do here is, as both a Templar and Marauder is, you want to get armor gear with life, and if you can, elemental damage. So things with life really good. You still want to be tanky. I have around almost 2k HP. I did some gear swapping yesterday, so I lost around 80 HP, but that's okay. I got a lot more armor this time. So that's what you want to go for. My resistances are almost capped. I think my fire resist is the only one that isn't, so yeah, gear. You can see here I'm going for attack speed life and elemental damage on my gloves. On boots, something you want to focus on is getting movement speed, which is really good. I have a 30% one. Bow, focus on a lot of elemental damage. Physical damage is not that bad, which I will explain why later. Getting a bit of it. Rings, quite easy to get some lightning damage or anything on that. 30% increased elemental damage to weapons is also a really nice thing to have. You can have it on quiver, you can have it on rings, you can have it on neck. So that's something to consider as well. Try to avoid accuracy if you can. I have a bit on my head, I think on my gloves. That's just how it is because I haven't been able to find anything else. You don't need accuracy, but sometimes you can avoid having it because the gear piece is just better anyway. Okay. Another thing you can have is, to boost your dexterity, is having a quiver with dexterity. Which you will probably need to run because of the nature of the tree right now. It's quite hard to get all the dex nodes, and it's not going to be quite enough. So you're going to need something to boost your dex, which is going to be either on quiver or neck. When it comes to flasks, with this setup, I don't really need any mana flasks. I'm running seething and bubbling flasks, which are the best I think. It's insta-heal, and a granite. And when you get a granite flask, try to get the iron skin one, which increases the armor during the effect. When I pop this flask, I show you defense. You see my armor is at 1250. Popping the flask, I'm at 2.6k. No, at 26k. Sorry, for a couple of seconds. So this mod on it really good. Okay, moving on to the sockets. There are two abilities you want to use in this build, which are pretty much mandatory, which is the poison arrow and elemental hit. So my setup for these are on poison arrow, increased duration, greater multiple projectiles, and pierce. It's a really nice ability for farming, and probably what you're gonna use throughout most of the game until end game. It's really gonna carry you through it, especially in the early game when you're gonna struggle a bit, or struggle more than you did before. Poison arrow is gonna be really good to have. So you wanna have, when you get a bow, try to get a 4 socket with a triple link, because that's what you wanna have. You don't have to have the increased duration. It's not. You could take like item quantity instead if you wanted to, but this is the setup I recommend. It's actually really good. So moving on, elemental hit. I'm running it with mana leech, weapon elemental damage, and faster attacks, which I think is the best setup for this. It's not too hard to get a 4 link with a red. Shouldn't be too hard. There's no 5 links in this build that I'm using right now or anything like that, so it's quite straightforward. Not very hard to obtain to socket this. So we have weapon elemental damage, quite self-explanatory, increases elemental damage that the weapon has with this ability, so of course it's good since it's elemental hit. increasing the attack speed of the ability. Since I don't even use my auto attack, I just have elemental hit on it instead. This is really good. If you can see my auto attack here, it's really fast. And then we have the mana leech, which is probably mandatory for the skill, because when you run this 4-link, it's gonna take a lot of mana. You're not gonna have time to regenerate it, especially not as a bow marauder, which have a bit harder time with the mana. So mana leech, really good to have on this ability. It makes it spammable because you're gonna leech back enough mana every time, or almost enough depending on your damage, to support the skill solely with just a gem. So the next thing I'm running is my boots with hatred, anger, reduced mana cost and clarity. So I'm running 3 auras on my boots, all with reduced mana cost. What auras you take? You can pretty much take anything. I prefer to have a hatred and a clarity, which is probably mandatory. Hatred takes up almost no mana, it's 22%, so really good to have. Clarity, self-explanatory as well, mana regen, really nice for you. Only level it to 6 though. See, not past 6, because then it takes up too much mana and it gives too little, so it's just best to have it at 6, because the mana it takes and the mana it gives is the most efficient one. For the third aura, you can use pretty much, you can use anger, you can use a wrath, doesn't really matter, just depends on what you prefer. I prefer to have anger, just because you can get some extra fire damage in the tree specifically. So the next thing I'm running, increased duration on the mortal call and phase run. So if I ever get in a sticky situation, I have a enduring cry, which is basically a taunt, as you can see, and gives me endurance stacks. It has a cooldown now, so I don't know if it's as good as it was before. This is what I'm using. So for immortal call, which makes you immune to physical damage. So I haven't had to use it a lot, but in some situations just getting up 3 endurance charges is quite good. Boost your defense. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for this build. So final thoughts on this. The build is... it's a bit nerfed now. The only reason I actually have more damage on my elemental hit is because it was easier to pick up some really nice attack speed nodes, which kind of saved the damage. Overall, slight nerf, not too bad though. I also forgot to add that the difference between the bow marauder and bow templar is that the templar has an easier time running more auras, just because of his mana pool is going to be a bit higher. He's going to have a bit more mana regen, so that's something to consider as well. I haven't personally played the bow marauder yet, but one of my friends plays him in hardcore, so hardcore might be a better choice for the bow marauder. I think in softcore I'd recommend using the templar. So yeah, thanks for listening guys, and hope that this guide helped you out, and I hope to see you all again.